So I said at the beginning that this was going to be fun, and it definitely was. This has been really interesting to explore this washi paper. Hi everyone, it's Toby from Toby's Urban Sketch, and today we're having some fun sketching in these. These are washi journals from a company called Nishikawa Shigyo. So they're a company from Kyoto. They're a very old company for over 100 years. They've been making washi paper. And they're now bringing out this new journal or collection of journals which are aiming to make them a bit more accessible, a bit more usable for everyday things. And so very excited that they asked me to do a little demonstration and see how we can sketch in them, see how they work in pen, ink and watercolours. We're going to do 3 sketches. We're going to do one which is a sort of 3-step process, doing a classic kind of scene, of course from Kyoto. And then we're going to do 2 other quick sketches to explore more about this paper and different pens and different inks and how these things interact. One will be a sketch of some cherry blossom, and the other will be a soluble ink sketch of a couple of people. And why do we need to experiment at all? It's just a journal, right? So the reason is washi paper is this handmade paper, and it's actually basically made of plants. So it's all very natural fibres. You can see the textures running through the page, and they are different in how they respond to ink and water. They're actually designed for calligraphy. So the idea behind washi journals, in the traditional sense, is that you would have one of these, which you go around different temples, collecting calligraphy sort of seals or calligraphy stamps, which are in themselves an amazing work of art. So this paper is designed, therefore, to work with that kind of ink, that Japanese ink brush. Now, we're not going to do exactly that today because we're going to see what it can do for us. And I can tell you, having filmed the video now, it's interesting, it's fun, and it is different. It's certainly not like using watercolour paper, but it was a really enjoyable experience to explore and experiment. And I do imagine I'll be continuing to explore and experiment with them in a couple of videos in the future as well. There are of course links down below to the Kickstarter, which is sort of how they are funding this product. So if you want to check that out, there's also tons of information about this specific journal, about the history of the company. That all said, of course, this is a promotion, and I always like to be very open and honest about that. So I've been paid to do this, but I do believe I'm being honest when I say I really enjoyed using them, and I actually really enjoyed the sketches that came from them. But you can be the judge of that. So why don't we move over and start sketching and just see what you actually make of the paper, what you make of the challenges from the paper, because it is different, but also what you make of the sort of the fun and the quirkiness and the difference of using something which is so different to our normal sort of Western or watercolour papers. So sometimes you can just tell something's going to be really fun, really exciting to play with. And these 3 Nishikawa washi journals are one of those times for sure. So these are the 3 journals that I've been sent to show you. And I just want to give you my first impressions. I've opened them, obviously, had a very quick flick through. And I've got to say, first impressions, they are beautiful, aren't they? They're very pretty. They've got a lovely textured surface. They're a nice weight. In terms of size, they're a little smaller than a half letter or an A5 size. So this is my normal moleskin sketchbook. You can see just a little bit smaller. There are 3 here. The reason there are 3 is because there's 3 different sort of designs of paper. We've got lined paper, and it opens out like a concertina. We've got dotted paper, which also opens out like a concertina. And then we've got plain paper. And also the plain paper one is in this removable cover. So it's got a little clip. And you can take that off, and obviously you can slip that on any of the journals. And it will protect your rather lovely covers here. And this one is plain. Now, one thing I noted when I was flicking through earlier is, because these are basically handmade from plants using natural fibres, if you flick through carefully, eventually we will find some little imperfections. So these little things, hopefully you can just pick them up through the camera. Now these are a feature. That's what happens with washi paper, because washi paper is made of natural plant fibres. So it's not perfect. It's got some randomness and it's got some texture, which maybe if I move it back and forwards, you can actually see this kind of texture that runs through the whole paper. Despite it being smooth, it's got a visual texture. So I'm really excited to see how these sketch and how these paint. And I know they're going to be different, right? We can't expect, this is not watercolour paper, this is not cartridge paper, this is washi paper, this is something different. It's designed for Japanese ink and Japanese ink brushes. So it would be rude to expect it to respond in the same way that it would normally respond to if we used our fountain pens and things like that. So what are we going to use? Well, firstly, we're going to use the plain journal, so our nice concertining out plain journal here, and we'll have a play with that, and we'll see if we can incorporate some of these folds into our sketch or sketches. And I'm going to use a couple of pens. I'm going to have a go with my Pentel brush pen. So Pentel brush pen is from Japan. It's got lovely ink in it. You might have seen me use it for lots of my direct watercolours where I then add some ink at the end. It's also great for sketching, just immediate loose sketches. So we'll have a go with that first. And at the end, we'll do some very quick doodles with a couple of other things which you might want to try and experiment with if you were to get some washi paper like this. One is just a normal rollerball pen. We'll then do some sketching with this Tombow Fude pen. So it's a sort of like a felt pen with a slightly flexible nib. So you can treat it like a Fude pen. And finally, of course, my normal set of watercolours. The list of watercolours, as always, is up on my website. And I'm going to be using this pen. So this is not a Japanese brush. This is a Chinese style brush, but it is nice and loose, and it will go really well with its big brush. It will go really well alongside the kind of loose lines that we'll achieve with our brush pen. So, with that in mind, I guess we need to start sketching. So here we go, and we're going to do a really simple, probably 3-step process where we take our pen, get our shapes, then add some colour, and then we come back and we just do those little finishing touches. And by doing a nice quick 3-step process, we can do a really quick and loose sketch. And we'll be using, like we said, this Pentel brush pen. So you'll have seen me use this before, but it's a Japanese ink pen. So hopefully this is the kind of optimum thing to use with our lovely washi journal. Now you can see I basically opened it out to not the first page, but a couple of pages in. And that, to be honest, that's my anxiety. I very rarely start my first sketch on the first page because I always want to save it for something brilliant. So, I know that goes against everything I normally say, but I do often just open it out a little bit, and then it gives me space. It gives me space to feel brave and just go for it and see what happens rather than feeling stuck in the moment. So here we go. In our lovely washi journal, what are we going to do? Well, the first step is always shapes. With our normal pens, we have the ability to draw very thin, small lines. With a brush pen, or even to some extent with a Fude pen like this, actually it's harder to draw those thin lines, so our shapes get simpler, get bigger, and it becomes more about the mark making, more about the fascination of the interaction with ink and paper, rather than about the sort of details. So with that said, let's start with our temple. And we can see it's hard, isn't it? But let's try and simplify it. We're going to simplify it into basically some triangles coming down, and just try and get just these first really big shapes. And look, it looks like madness, doesn't it? But it will come together. It will come together as we sort of sketch and just get more and more of these shapes. And look, really, really loose and kind of going a bit wonky. That's fine, we're sketching. What you can see as well, fascinating interaction with the paper. The paper's fairly absorbent, and that's probably, because it's natural paper. Cotton paper is more absorbent than normal sort of paper. So it's got this kind of slight bleed even with this pen, and we're getting softer lines, let's say. It's sort of softer as we sketch. So we need to just be gentle as we sketch as well, and quick. So if we leave our brush or pen too long, we'll end up with a bolder line than we're expecting, but that's fine. So what we do is we adapt, and it's going to just make sure we're sketching nice and quickly, nice and loosely. So look, it looks like nothing, right? It looks like just a stack of odd shapes, but let's leave that after we've added our little sort of turret chimney at the top and move on and just start finding other shapes and see if when we add context, actually this starts to make more sense and look more like what we want it to. So if we come from here, we can start grabbing the sort of shapes of these bigger buildings on the right, and the windows have just come down. So these are all just simple shapes. And think about when you do paint or use dark paint, think about how delicate you have to be with your brush. That's the kind of thing that you need to try and look for when you're sort of sketching along with something like this. You have to be really delicate and loose and just get the finest of lines to avoid overdoing it. And coming along, we're now on to the next building, just basically a rectangle with a little top along it. And then let's start adding in our people. So our people come in just below, or just over this awning here. And we just want to get them as little sort of silhouettes, I think. Just something really nice, simple. Kind of getting the idea of these flowing clothes as well. This person here, and they've got lovely little spots of colour in their hair from ribbon. So that might be something we want to make a feature of when we come later to adding a little touch of colour. But see how everything's a really big shape, really simple, really big shapes. You can add a little bit of texture as well, just to suggest a bit of something else going on in this image. Bring this kind of edge of the canopy down. Notice how I'm not finishing off the bottom. That, at the moment, it's not important. We'll see if it becomes important later or if we just want to leave it unfinished. Over here, we're going to bring in the roof and get a lovely sort of shape of those pillars along with that sort of rectangular roof. Another roof here, and a lot of just complexity going on at the bottom of this tower. So we can pick out something interesting there and maybe zoom in on it and make a feature of that. So there's two things I'm noticing. One, there's this lamp in the very back. We can just bring that down. And then I think a bit closer, we've got another kind of lamp. And we can just, again, just add that in. Doesn't need to be context. It's really hard to see where the lamp's hanging. At least for me, it's really hard to see where the lamp's hanging. So it doesn't need any more than that, because if we can't tell in the reference, we don't need to be able to tell in our sketch. Now I'm going to come off to the left and start doing this. So one thing you'll notice, at the beginning I said we were going to use, make this kind of folder feature. I purposefully chose a kind of landscape image, something where we're going to have to go over the pages. Because I always think, if you've got a sketchbook, particularly if it's something like a concertina sketchbook, but even if you've just got a normal sketchbook, it can be really lovely to incorporate the folds as part of your art, even if it's just creating a texture, if it's just showing people how you were sketching, what you were sketching. It tells you more about the materials than a perfect bit of paper. So that's why we're coming over rather than moving it or rather than flipping it round. And then we got this. So moving back, I'm all over the place today, aren't I? Moving back to this sort of set of shapes. We've got a kind of big shape here, we've got a big shape there. Then we've got a little roof here, which is kind of just another couple of shapes. Same here. And I hope you can see everything here, just really big, really simple shapes. Now, what I am going to do is add in the sort of pavement line there, because that kind of feels like it needs something flowing in. This side's much busier up here, this side, so we want something else just pulling the eye in. And I'm actually going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it there. That is going to be the end of step one. And it's so simple, isn't it? And it's so loose. It almost looks a bit mad, but we can add more ink in a bit. And before that, we're going to get splashing on a little bit of our colour. So let's see how the colour interacts with this paper. And again, what I think is going to happen with watercolour paper, remember, we can push and prod and it will flow everywhere. With this, what I suspect is going to happen is it will sink in, it will absorb. Like normal paper, when you try and sketch on cartridge paper, it's difficult to push the watercolour around. But this, the paper is very absorbent, so I imagine we're going to get a kind of flow out, a kind of bleed out effect. So let's see, as we sketch, if that is indeed what happens. I'm going to start with some nice warm colours, and I'm not going to make this complicated. Experimenting with new paper, experimenting with something exciting. I don't want to push it too hard and regret. You know, I want to have a really positive experience, and so I'm going to keep it simple. So this is quinacridone sienna, and I'm just going to find some lovely areas of warmth that are in this sketch, and just pop this in as a little dot to suggest that warmth. And you can see it's got that kind of, yeah, it does have that kind of flowing out effect. So we pop it in one place and it just softens. So it's kind of like the effect that I love getting from wet on wet sketching, except we're not wet on wet, we're sketching on absorbent paper. So quite interesting. And see what else it feels like. I don't know if you've ever sketched on, painted rather, on software like Rebel or even to some extent Procreate. But the ones which sort of try and act as simulators for watercolours, and they have that kind of pushing out, bleeding out effect. This is a very similar feel, just from this few strokes. That's what it's feeling like to me. So this was a bit of Hansa yellow, just to add. You see, there's some golden glints and things going on. I just wanted to sort of get more of that effect. Going to move now on to some indigo, and that's going to do these rooftop shapes, nice and loosely as well. So real, just splodges of colour, which are going to definitely do their own thing, and we'll come and sort of respond and find out what happened in a little bit. And we can just use this indigo to come down and create a bit of depth and darkness in the sort of appropriate places of our image. So certainly, like, there's another roof, there's some shadow here, and then off this edge there's more shadow. And then we're back to warmth on the other side, so let's just find these warm areas and touch them in. And already, I hope you can see that already, actually, despite the sort of madness at the beginning, this loose approach of colour, which is just helping define those shapes, is actually, I think, making it quite an effective little image, quite illustrative, but a lovely loose sketch. So I'm hoping you're enjoying it, at least, hoping that you agree. Going to find these lanterns, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make both of these lanterns glow. So this is our Hansa yellow again, just to give that lovely glowing effect. The windows can glow as well, because why not? And we can find other places to just touch in our yellow. I'm going to add one more colour for now, which will be a sepia, a nice deep brown. And I want that for a bit more depth and a bit of sort of suggestion of the road, and where the pavement meets the buildings, we can just blend together a bit of indigo, a bit of sepia, and we'll hopefully get a nice sort of deep suggestion of complexity. I think that's worked all right. Now, what else can we do? What else? Well, there's a nice bit of depth we haven't found here. And again, let's just mix in that bit of that sepia just to give us plenty of variation going on. And perhaps, you know, what we want to do is a little bit more texture with our watercolours. Just suggestions of some of these kind of areas of like wooden board and things. So I'm going to use my indigo, my brown, my quinacridone, just come in up and down, create some of these suggestions of lines. This is where these brushes become amazing. They can do such fine lines, bold lines. Really good fun to play with. I'm actually really finding it interesting. We look here, that's really interesting texture. So this is the texture you get from hot press paper, where the water absorbs very quickly, so that the granules settle immediately, and you get this very fine granular pattern. So it's very interesting. You can see here as well how it absorbs out. You can see how nothing I've done is a hard line. Nothing that I've put my watercolour down is a real structured block. It's all very flowy and loose, like a gentle wet on wet sketch. A few splashes, of course, because we have to. And a little bit of indigo in the splashing up here. And I think that I'm going to call that one done. That is step 2 done. Now I'm just going to let this dry, and then we will move on to step 3, where we'll come back with our pen and we're going to restructure, find some of those shapes, and just finish off our lovely little sketch, as well as popping into bright colours on our people here. So we are nice and dry, and you can see actually the colours haven't faded very much. I think that's because it's sort of absorbed. So as we painted, we got the colours we were going to get. And what we're going to do now is add on that final bit of structure, that little bit of extra ink. We need to be really careful with such a bold pen not to overdo it, but at the same time, there's definitely a bit of structure we can find. So let's start again where we started before, in the top of the temple, and just start finding perhaps just a little bit of those dark shadows, for example, which we didn't get in with our watercolours, and just restructuring around where some of these lines and shapes have gone a bit wonky in our first version. And again, just adding in little loose textures, just little flicks of the brush. Again, nice dark shadows to go with these light bold colours. And just reshaping some of these shapes. And there we go, we're getting there, little by little. And then come down onto this last one. And again, just a little bit of reshaping. And then, what have we got here? We've got quite a lot of darkness. We can come in, we can, again, just find that with our pen. We can probably find a little bit under here as well. It's just about glancing around, looking back, taking a step back and seeing what's happening in your image and what do we need to add to sort of compensate for that. So, restructuring around these shapes, for example. Restructuring around these textures, which are supposed to be sort of boards or something like that going up the side of our building. Got lots of nice roofs which have got a sort of swoopy, swirly textures, for want of a more technical word. We can add those in. What we're just doing is we're making the image a bit busier, but trying not to overdo it at the same time. But just a little bit of extra something going on. Now in the back here there's loads going on, so we can just start to find suggestions of those kind of things, basically suggestions of what we can see going on in the background. We can see lots of different shapes, coming across, going in, going out, and we just find those, add them in, find these sort of roofs, and again, a bit of texture on those roofs, a bit of contrast to make things pop where they need to, and then maybe we can just make these rooftops a little bit more ornate as well, because they've got much more of a loop, haven't they? Much more of a loop at the edge. And just be nice to be able to really simply suggest that kind of feel in our very loose sketch. And there we go. What else can we add? Where else can we go looking for more details and more textures? Maybe in this big roof, there's lots of little lines coming down here. Maybe over here we've got a kind of lattice work. And then we've got this big space off to the left, haven't we? We've got this lovely tree. And it feels like these kind of pens are just made for adding in these kind of sweeping tree marks. So let's just do that. Let's add in, just with some little flicks, some little sort of twists of the pen, we can suggest this tree just looming across. And it adds that bit more sort of structure, again, pushing across, pushing into our temple. That's all I'm going to do with the pen. I think any more and we'll risk over... there's always something, isn't there? Maybe just a little bit here, a little bit of texture. Just to fill in this, felt like a gap. Just as I looked down, felt like a gap here. So that for now, all I'm going to do with the pen. And now we're going to do these lovely sort of bold colours on our silhouetted people. And I'm going to be brave. I'm going to actually use some new colours. So I'm going to suggest a nice bold sort of red here in our person on the left, our lady on the left. Just a really bold touch of red, which can bleed around, and by bleeding around will cause different kind of textures within that, different kind of effects within that red. So it's not just a flat red, it's a bobbly little fun bit of red. Then the lady on the left we're going to make blue, and just to make them stand out plenty. And I'm going to leave a little bit of white between them just to separate them in a couple of places. And then the hair, well, let's try our sepia, and let's see what happens with the sepia. And that's probably the right kind of effect I'm after. I just want to soften it out a little bit. So come back in with a clean, dry brush, and I just move some of that dark, bold colour, just to let it soften out. And even just use some of that on my brush now to just create a little bit of texture in a few places. Why not? That's actually working really well. Well, that's fun. That's something, this is the exploration part, isn't it? Discovering the kind of textures you can get. Now I regret not doing more of this. There you go. I'm going to overwork it in a second. But look at those textures just emerge as you sort of flick around with this pen. Not something I would normally do with my watercolours, but something which seems to work really well in this context, on this kind of paper. Now with this blue and red, I just want to make sure it's somewhere else in the image. It's not just on those people. It won't draw the eye too much. So just a few fun little splatters. And there we go. That's our very loose, lively little sketch of a Kyoto sort of street scene done. I'm going to pop my initials on there. I'm going to let it dry. And then what we're going to do on another page, we'll do some little sort of doodle sketches and have a play just with these other pens and find out how those pens work for us as well. But I hope you have enjoyed this 3-step process and are ready just to find out a little bit more about this paper with a little bit more experimentation. So with that, let's move on to a new page. And this is where you can have some fun, just experimenting even more, having a little bit of a play. And what am I going to experiment with? Well, 2 different pens, my Tombow and my rollerball, my V5 rollerball. Now, what I thought would be fun is to just do some flower sketches, because flowers, a couple of people have asked me to sketch them in the first place. Secondly, cherry blossoms are a lovely flower, which are out everywhere at the moment in the UK, and they're also wonderfully associated with Japan. So let's start with our Tombow, and let's just do some really loose lines and see how the pen and the paper react, and then add on some colours, splash on some colours, and get our lovely effect of some sort of cherry blossom. I'm not going to say they're being perfect, but they're going to be cherry blossom inspired at the very least. So when we think of cherry blossom, what kind of shapes do we have? And what you could do is you could Google cherry blossom and just get any old reference up. For me, one thing we think about is it kind of these delicate flowers on quite characterful branches. So what we could do, we just have them coming in, perhaps dangling in from the side like so. Just get these kind of initial feel of branches, and then just be bringing some flower-like shapes, more like cups, and from these cups is where our flower and our colours are going to emerge. And we could just do the same here. I'll tell you what, this pen works rather nicely on this paper as well. It's so smooth. You can see it does absorb. It does absorb a little bit, it does bleed a little bit. If I hold it down, it doesn't actually bleed too badly, to be fair. No, in fact, it's just soft. It's just a soft effect that you get from using this absorbent paper. Fascinating to work with, having normally worked with watercolour paper. So we just keep bringing down these kind of like cup-like effects, because I think cherry blossom isn't something you're used to looking up close, is it? Normally, you look at cherry blossom from a distance, you get the effect of lines with this kind of often pink effect, this beautiful pink colour. So we're going to, as ever, just stick with the colours in my palette though. So how are we going to sort of simulate pink? Well, really pink is a kind of a very light red, isn't it? So what we can do, we can take maybe a little bit of mayan orange, because that's actually quite a reddy colour despite the name, a little bit of scarlet lake, and between those 2 colours, just dilute them down. And why use 2? Just to get a bit more variation. And with that colour, we can just touch in, and that's possibly a bit too red, so we'll come back a bit, and we'll just come and, there you go. So you see that lovely kind of pink just by diluting it down. And again, you can see the effect of the paper here. It's very soft, it absorbs, and it produces a lovely soft effect. We could amp up a little bit of the red in places, and then we can provide just a general scatter of flowers. And then maybe come back with a little bit of more red, different red this, so they combine different colours. And there you go, a fun little doodle sketch which is showing off the paper in a couple of different ways. Now let's just try something else, something different with our pilot, our V5 rollerball. And the reason I wanted to use this actually is because it's a water-soluble ink. So what I'm going to do is a really quick sketch on this side, no colour, and just see how this paper responds with water-soluble ink. Because this sketch, these have been waterproof. So let's see, final experiment, what happens with water-soluble ink. Now for this sketch, I thought this would be a fun reference. These 2 people just walking down the street, and we're going to do them really quickly, like a very gestural drawing. and just see how we can use water to impact the quality of line and see if we can get a little bit of drawing down of the colour. So I'm going to start with these lovely umbrellas and just get the kind of shape in, just to quickly get the shape with these kind of textures. And we just do real quick continuous lines, aiming for forming that kind of circle-like shape of the umbrella. And then I'm going to come straight in and just soften away. And look, we get that lovely gentle bleeding effect. So that's really fun. And you can see where the water keeps absorbing, it keeps bleeding, and that's similar to when we use our normal watercolour paper, isn't it? Let's just then continue these kind of loose shapes, and we can come back up, get this arm in, and the sort of head is hidden just out of sight here, and just little suggestions of feet, just with nice, again, just simple continuous lines. And again we can then come in and just soften and blend and move. And there's less ink there, so it's going to be less dark, but what we could do perhaps just come in on that wet page and move and smudge it a bit more. Maybe you want to smudge out some of these lines as well. Now what you can see, actually interesting to note, is what's happening is the ink goes both ways. So it doesn't actually just, because the paper is absorbing the water, the ink doesn't just come with the brush. So I'm used to just being able to drag the ink across. So it's interesting to note that, and it means we have to sort of change slightly what we're doing. So I'm going to have to just reapply a little line, make our person a little broader of shoulder, broader of stomach as well. But now we know. So this is why we do these little doodles to understand our paper. This is the kind of thing I would suggest if you get new paper, any kind of new paper, that you just go around and sketch a couple of things, a normal scene and a couple of other little things, to really get to know it, rather than just assuming it's going to act how you want it to. Just get to know your paper first. We'll just do this other person as well, because why not? Got a little bit of a face there, and then we've got this kind of ruffle of the umbrella coming round, and there we go, the kind of shape of the umbrella again, and we'll come in. And just being aware that everything's going to get very loose, I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to, this time, just apply water where I want the colour to go, and see if I'm just more cautious, can I prevent my shapes getting really big? And yes, I can. So with a really simple change of just understanding the paper, I can actually direct my ink much better, and we can end up with little sort of getting the colour, instead of the shapes broadening, the ink is coming inside this time, which is much more what I was after. Now just give them something to stand on, a little shadow. There we go. And there's my two people. So cherry blossoms, a couple of people, and a lovely street scene. I forgot to sign my last one, didn't I? But through all of this, I think hopefully you can get a really good idea of this paper, the kind of possibilities that we have, kind of fun, and what's different, what's challenging, and what, if we're going to use this paper, what processes we have to change. But I've got to say, for this style, this soft, loose style, where we don't let our colours flow, because they don't flow, but what they do instead is they bleed and move in their own way again. This has been a really fun experience. So if you feel like it, do check out the company's page, and see what you think, and see if this is something which you think suits you or not. Because what we've got to do, of course, is do the things which make us happy, experiment and have fun seeing what we can do that fits our style, and really what makes us happy. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel, because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.